Well, I thought we'd start today with a little bit of a game just to warm up, okay? And this is going to be famous Canadian quotes, okay? Quotes by famous Canadian people, and you need to guess who said it, all right? You can just shout it out. There's no prizes, okay? Just bragging rights. I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so they can see that it's not the answer. That was Jim Carrey, a Canadian comedian extraordinaire. Okay, ready? No dress rehearsal, this is our life. No dress rehearsal, this is our life. Gard Downey, the Tragically Hip, the late singer of the Tragically Hip. All right, hope you got that one. That was a gimme, people. All right, here we go. In the end, we'll all become stories. Canadian author Margaret Atwood. Some of you are like, I don't know who that is. You should read. Okay, here we go. Ready? I don't care how any other Canadian team does other than the Edmonton Oilers. Just think, even if you've never heard that quote, you just think, who said it? Connor McDavid, who plays for the Edmonton Oilers. All right, ready? This one's really tough. My baby, 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 oh. It's the Beebs. All right, that's probably going to be the only thing that's in your head after this whole message. Okay, ready? What's that, Kawhi? You need a secret place to plan your escape from the team you just won a championship with? The team that I'm an ambassador for? Sure, use my condo, no problem. Drake, how could you do that? I don't know if he said that. I don't think he did. Don't tell him I said he said, because I don't think he did. But he helped Kawhi leave. Come on, and I haven't gotten over it. All right, ready? Last one. The medium is the message. The medium is the message. It is the late Marshall McLuhan. Now, those are a bunch of famous people. Probably the least famous to you or to many people these days would be the last person I read. But actually, his words are probably the most important for us over the last several decades, and certainly right now. Marshall McLuhan was a philosopher and a professor of media and communications. He taught at several universities in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. One of those universities was the University of Toronto. And his phrase, the medium is the message, is one of the most important quotes associated with him. He actually became quite famous in the 60s and 70s. He was in Esquire magazine. He was in The New Yorker. He was written up one time. There were 30 articles written about him in the New York Times in just 1 year. He was on NBC, he was sort of popularizing philosophy and media teaching and communications. And his quote, the medium is the message, he was saying this: media, or medium, which is the singular form, media is the plural of the word medium, is not agnostic. In other words, it isn't just about what you're communicating. The medium that you're using to communicate is a message in and of itself. He was writing and talking in the time of television, as television was growing in popularity and proliferation in every Canadian home. And he was saying, hey, it isn't just the content that's on there. The television itself is a message. The way you use to communicate something is a message. And he was warning people against where technology was going. And yet, people, though he was popular and people were listening to him, after a while, people started to say, oh, you're too paranoid about the future. You're too negative about the effects of technology. People were saying this in the 60s and 70s. But listen to what he said. Listen, and what I'm about to read is before the internet, before the smartphone, before TikTok. Listen to what he says. Everybody has become porous. The light and the message go right through us, he said during a television appearance. At this moment, we are on the air, and on the air, we do not have any physical body. When you're on the telephone or on radio or on TV, you don't have a physical body. You're a discarnate being. You have a very different relation to the world around you. It has deprived people, really, of their identity. We are porous. The light goes right through us. This is before the smartphone and TikTok. And he says the medium is the message. And think about this, the TikTok phenomenon, that TikTok itself is not just something that is sending out, for example, content, it is itself a message. What is the message that TikTok as an app, as a medium is saying? It's saying you deserve to be entertained 24/7. And if you're not entertained within the first 3 seconds, you can move on. It's actually a medium that's talking about next. That's the message, that's who you are, that's how you're meant to relate to the world. Forget what content it is. It's actually driving just the use. And TikTok and the people who profit from it are not so much interested in the content on it. They're interested in how much you're interested in it. As one person profoundly noted about social media, the difference between most social media platforms and every other media before it, even in the time of Marshall McLuhan, is that now social media is not selling you products. It is selling you as the product to advertisers. Your eyeballs, your attention, your watch, your scrolling, and the constant scrolling is the product that is being sold to the advertisers who are paying the people who are providing the content. Friends, that is as a perfect example of how the media has become the message and is a message in and of itself. McLuhan also said in his 4 rules of technology, one of them was, how do you know when a piece of technology has run its course or has been pushed too far? He says it begins to reverse or undo the thing that it first came to do. And the perfect example, of course, is the telephone. The telephone was invented as a piece of technology to allow people to communicate from a distance more personally, to be able to hear each other's voice, to actually increase human connection. And yet now when you walk into a doctor's office, or a school, or a dinner table, you will find adults and youth and kids all having telephones, and those phones actually working to disconnect them, that they are having less connection with each other because of the phone, even though when the phone first started, it was meant to increase connection. McLuhan says, yeah, that's how you know a technology has run its course. He prophesied decades ago what we know now, that we are in a technological crisis. The U.S. Surgeon General over the last several years, and whether you've read any specific studies or not, what I'm going to say to you is not surprising. You've heard this somewhere, that the increasing, the mental health epidemic that we have, the increasing incidences of depression and anxiety, especially among young people, is higher for those who use social media more. The more technology we are on, especially as young people, the more likely we are to experience a crisis of mental health, of depression and anxiety. We have a mental health epidemic. We have a pornography epidemic. More and more people regularly using pornography. And listen, pornography isn't just about, looking at bad things on the internet. Pornography is inherently about depersonalization. The depersonalization and isolation of human connection, that people prefer to have a sexual connection digitally with not real people or people they don't know, rather than in person. And in doing so, creating a world in which men are using, men primarily, but women as well, that men and women become objects that are being used, that are being dehumanized into objects, not people. And that's why it is an epidemic as well of depersonalization, of isolation. We have a loneliness epidemic. And here's what's crazy. As loneliness increases, the use of technology and pornography increases the sense of loneliness. Many people use pornography because they are lonely, and that only increases their sense of loneliness. Many people use doom scrolling on their social media app because they feel lonely, and that only increases the experience of isolation. And so this is growing around the world in every country and in every age demographic. And of course, all of us collectively as a world went through COVID, and post-COVID, our social muscles and our interactions with people has decreased. More and more of us are working behind screens, spending hours and hours and hours alone in our rooms. More than ever before, the COVID crisis accelerated something that was already happening from the time McLuhan was writing in the 30s and 40s and 50s, all the way to now. And you're saying, yeah, I know, I've heard this, I know. Why are we talking about it in church? We're talking about it in church because it's not going anywhere, it's getting worse. And more so and more profoundly, we are a community. The church is a community made up of individuals and a community of people. And the crisis here, and Robert Putnam in his book, Bowling Alone, was talking about the increasing sense of isolation. He was talking about America, but around the world. And he said the great casualty of this growing isolation and loneliness is that it has a direct effect on the body, that physically we are suffering because we're alone more. But he said it also makes it difficult for societies to function, and especially for communities of people to solve problems and handle complexity together. The more alone we are, the harder it is to negotiate and navigate as a community. And the church is a community of individuals and a collective. And so it so matters to us how we thrive as a community in a season like this. And as we start this year, what does it mean for us as a church to be the church in a community, in a time, and a culture like ours? Every year, our staff meet together for strategic planning, and last year we were away on a retreat together. And one of the things we do as we plan, we also pray and we ask God, what is it that you have for our church this year? And I mentioned this to you in the fall, that God gave us 2 words that we felt were meant to shape our community this year. The first one was ownership, and we talked about that in the fall, increasing our level of ownership and connection for each other as a community. But the second word was this: hospitality. Now, hospitality is maybe an out-of-vogue word, or maybe it's associated still in churches or church cultures, or maybe people sort of use it to think about, hosting people in your home for a meal. But as we wrestle with that word, we're like, no, it means something so much more than that, and we kind of are using this word instead, the word welcome. What does it mean for us to be people who welcome one another, a community of welcome? What does it mean for us to practice welcome and hospitality in our world, in our culture, in a place, in a time when the technological revolution is pushing us more and more towards loneliness, isolation, depersonalization? What does it mean for us to be a community of welcome? And so that's what we're going to dive into over these next several weeks. And our prayer is that you would be able to, this would help you as a result, if you're new to our church, or you're checking out the church, or this is home in your community, that this would help you and I figure out how to stay human in a time and a culture that is pushing us away from each other and away from ourselves in another sense. I thought we want to begin today is with the fact that the Jesus movement, when it started 2,000 years ago, was a movement of what was called good news, and that Jesus followers went everywhere and were actually sent out by him as messengers with the message of good news. And even though that happened 1,900 years before Marshall McLuhan ever came on the scene, his line, "The medium is the message," could actually very well describe what good news message they were going around everywhere telling everyone about. And to do that and to understand that, I want to go back to actually just the beginning of the Jesus biography that we find in Luke, which actually, as a community, we're going to be reading through. We're starting our new reading plan today through the book of Luke. And it begins with a couple of passages that we normally read at Christmas that actually you would have read this Christmas and that several of us would have preached on. But I want to start there of what was this message of good news that the earliest Jesus followers were taking around everywhere they went in the known world. And here's where it begins. Luke chapter 1, verse 26. In the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a village in Galilee, to a virgin named Mary. She was engaged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of King David. Gabriel appeared to her and said, "Greetings, favored woman, the Lord is with you." Confused and disturbed, Mary tried to think what the angel could mean. "Don't be afraid, Mary," the angel told her, "for you have found favor with God. You will conceive and give birth to a son, and you will name him Jesus. He will be very great and will be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord will give him the throne of his ancestor David, and he will reign over Israel forever. His kingdom will never end." What was the good news that the angel first delivered to Mary that then Luke wrote down many years later as he and several others were spreading this message of good news? Good news, God is planning to save and heal and make the world new through a person. A person. The good news was a person. that God was sending himself, his own son, in the flesh as the message. And this is just, we just have to step back and go, this is actually unique in all world religions. Many world religions or worldviews have stories of a god or gods doing things in the world. But generally speaking, some religions have this God consciousness or one god or many gods, but those gods exist out of time, out of space. They don't have bodies, they're not flesh, they're spirits, and they live in another, quote, spiritual world away from everyday, ordinary earth. There are some worldviews that see that's where God or the gods are. There are other worldviews and religions that have the gods entering our world, but they enter as gods. Huge, muscle-bound, like Thor, right? Or Thanos. Yes, they're entering world, but they're still God and only God, and they're superhuman. They're not of the earth, in a sense. Unique in all worldviews and religions is this story about God choosing to enter this world, but to become like the ones he was coming to save. He is both in this passage the Son of God, divine, but also the Son of Mary, human. This is unique. This story of the message or God's chosen way of healing the world is through a person. And we just have to stop and go, that's unique in all religions. But secondarily and primarily, think about this. God's primary way of sending that message of healing and restoring and saving and renewing our world, how did God choose to do this? What was his message or the way he did it, the medium of this message? It was not by truth bombs, just by teaching. Just hear these words, read these instructions. Here's some ideas. That's how ideas are going to change the world. It was not through God being a puppet master, working and pulling all the strings and making this person here and doing this to that person and blessing this good person and moving these things around. That's not how God was healing and saving and restoring the world. Neither was it through God armies of angels coming and, cracking heads and like, poof, you're healed, poof, you're dead. That's not how God chose to heal and save the world. It was by his own flesh and blood presence. Becoming like the ones he came to heal and save and restore. Being with the ones he came to save and heal and restore. That was God's chosen media, was presence. The medium is the message, God's presence with us. In fact, that word media comes from the Latin word media, which means something between. And isn't it crazy that God actually chose to remove everything that stood between us and him, and in a sense, move all of the media aside to come and be with us himself, to come in the flesh. God wasn't sending messengers. He was the message in the flesh. Jesus, Son of God, Son of Mary. And the way God chose to do that is actually saying something to us about what, listen, the good news is and what does it mean to be a community of good news. It is the message about the way God saves and heals and makes new. Is physical presence. His physical presence. And listen, we can romanticize this idea of God becoming flesh through Christmas and all the feels and whatever that come around that, the season we've just been through. But think about this. Physical presence, God choosing to put himself into our world to become the message of good news for us, was at first very weak and small. A baby. Babies don't do much. They just need things from other people. They're not very powerful at all. In fact, they're very weak and small and, quote, ineffective. Physical presence God chose was weak and small and, in a sense, ineffective. Was also slow and inefficient. It took 9 months, first of all, just for the baby to even arrive, and then 30 years of nothing. The reason we know there was pretty much nothing in the first 30 years of Jesus' life other than these miraculous events at his birth is nobody wrote anything down. It didn't raise any eyebrows. No one knew anything other than this dude's just a carpenter's son. Not just 9 months, but 30 years of physical presence, which was very inefficient. And then before he did anything powerful. And then 3 years and he was done. Physical presence is not just weak, it was apparently to God inefficient as well. And actually think about this, physical presence means that God chose to limit himself. Because he was in a body and not a spirit moving all over the place and a superpower who could fly and leap tall buildings or whatever, it meant he was in one place at one time and could only be in one place at one time, sometimes with just one other person or sometimes with a handful of people. The limitation of physical presence. But this is what God chose to do. This was his chosen media for saving the world. Physical presence. That was at times weak and inefficient and slow. And as a result, this plan seems like bad news or a foolish plan to a lot of people. The Greek culture that Jesus came into didn't really think the body, the physical world, had any relevance or was very important. The Greek culture thought, no, the spirits live up in the world we can't see. Plato's whole vision of the cave and the shadows on the cave and saying, no, what we see is not really real. What's really real is the stuff we can't see. The stuff we can't see is ordinary, unspiritual, and therefore the earth and our bodies really didn't mean much in Greek culture. You can do whatever you want with them. This idea that God would somehow adopt or take on a body of flesh was kind of foolishness to Greek culture. But likewise, it's foolish to the neo-Buddhist worldview or the New Age worldview, which says, all that we see in this world, the physical world, is actually an illusion. That the real kind of nirvana and heaven and enlightenment is this non-physical, non-material, supreme consciousness. That's what's real. All of this, the world and the earth and the body, they're just trappings. They kind of trap us in pain or pleasure, and somehow we have to meditate ourselves to disconnect ourselves from everyday life, because everyday life is not where thing is really at. It's in this ethereal, supreme consciousness that one day we will be absorbed into like nirvana. And so it's foolishness to the Buddhist or the neo worldview. But it's also foolish, this idea of physical presence, to the digital age, where we prefer digital communication in the digital world because it's more interesting, it's more effective, it's faster. Friends, the battle in the digital age is not digital versus analog. It's digital instead of human. This is the great trade-off. It started with, a digital clock better than an analog clock. Now it's like a digital world, digital people rather than real people. The digital age is faster. You can communicate. And one of the things McLuhan said, he says, in the way we see technology, that these are extensions of ourselves that we think are actually ourselves, even though they're non-reality. For the Greeks, for the neo-Buddhists, for the digital natives, God's chosen way of saving the world seems foolish and slow and ineffective. But as Jesus people, friends, we resist that idea. We resist those trends, and we understand human beings together is God's chosen way of getting things done. That's his chosen way of healing and saving and restoring the world. And think about this. Look what happens when God shows up in our world as a human. When God in a bod appears in this world. Look what happens as we continue to read this story in Luke chapter 2. At that time, the Roman Emperor Augustus decreed that a census should be taken throughout the Roman Empire. This was the first census taken when Quirinius was governor of Syria. All returned to their ancestral towns to register for the census. And because Joseph, that's Mary's husband now, was a descendant of King David, he had to go to Bethlehem in Judea, David's ancient home. He traveled there from the village of Nazareth in Galilee. He took with him Mary, to whom he was engaged, and was now expecting a child. And while they were there, the time came for her baby to be born. She gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him snugly in strips of cloth and laid him in a manger because there was no lodging available for them. Look what happens next. That night, there were shepherds staying in the field nearby, guarding their flocks of sheep. Suddenly, an angel of the Lord appeared among them, and the radiance of the Lord's glory surrounded them. They were terrified, but the angel reassured them, "Don't be afraid. I bring you good news that will bring great joy to all people. The Savior, yes, the Messiah, the Lord, has been born today in Bethlehem, the city of David. And you will recognize him by this sign. You will find a baby wrapped snugly in strips of cloth, lying in a manger." When the angels had returned to heaven, the shepherds said to each other, "Let's go to Bethlehem. Let's see this thing that has happened, which the Lord has told us about." They hurried to the village and found Mary and Joseph, and there was the baby lying in the manger. After seeing him, the shepherds told everyone what had happened and what the angel had said to them about this child. Do you see what happens as soon as God shows up in our world? Jesus in the flesh? Do you know what happens next? Welcome. Welcome. As soon as God appears in the flesh in our world, the medium as the message, presence, he begins to welcome people. Immediately, he begins to draw people to him. People who didn't know each other, people who came from different towns, people who came from different ethnic backgrounds, people who came from different religious backgrounds, people who came from different socioeconomic backgrounds, people who came from different sketchy pasts were brought together. Shepherds were not considered reputable people. They weren't even considered honest enough to testify in court, which is amazing that they are then given by God the message of testifying about the most important news ever to everyone. But right away, Jesus begins to draw people to him. As soon as he shows up in presence, he begins to welcome others to himself and to each other. And this isn't just in the Christmas narratives. If you go on and read the rest of Luke's biography, as we will, and all of the biographies of Jesus, what you will find is Jesus is constantly welcoming people to him. People who didn't know each other, people who didn't think they could be together, people who thought bad of each other, people who thought that the other person wouldn't welcome them or wouldn't want to be with them, people for whom were not allowed in certain circles, in certain places. It was a very divided, segregated, racist world that Jesus lived in. But as he came together and as he came into this world, immediately he began to welcome people to him and to each other. He formed friendships and a community. He didn't just have individual encounters, he brought people together. This is the way Jesus works. This is God's chosen method of saving and healing and restoring our world, is by physical presence. And if you read the Gospels, you will probably come to this conclusion. It's most likely that you and I will experience God welcoming us close to him and connecting us to him by being with other human beings. That's most likely how we're going to experience the welcome and the connection and the love of God, is through physical presence with other human beings, because that's the way Jesus has always worked. He did not start a revolution by truth bombs. He did teach, but it was through a community. He formed a community that he shaped by his life and by his presence. One of the practices that I do often and that I've recommended to you before, and I know many of you do, is called an examine. It's just like kind of a daily exercise of going back over the last 24 hours and asking myself in prayer, with the help of the Holy Spirit, hey, when was I most aware of the love of God or the grace of God or the peace of God or awareness of God's presence, or in some way or some place or moment of peace over the last 24 hours? Do you know whenever I do that, it's almost always a memory or an encounter with other people. It was when I was worshiping on a Sunday with a group of people. It was when I was at my dinner table laughing with my kids and my wife. It was when I was on a walk with Jen outside, or an interaction with another person. It almost always is with other people. And then as I look back on those 24 hours, I realize in that moment I didn't see it, but I see it now. God, you were there. You were present by your Spirit, but through the flesh and blood interactions that I had with other real people. That's almost always when I experience that peace and love and joy. And when I reflect back and realize, oh my gosh, God was there. You know what this means? Every time I do this exercise, and maybe those of you that do this, you would have experienced it as well. We are so unaware of Jesus being with us. Jesus was there, and we're so often unaware of it. And secondly, we so downplay or sometimes are outright ignorant of the incredible power of being with each other. We're just so casual about it, and in a sense, living in a culture that's trading it off like it's nothing for digital experiences. We downplay or are ignorant of how powerful it is to be together. And so my encouragement to you as we step into this series over the next several weeks about what it means to be a place and a people of welcome, the practice of radical hospitality together. If you're lonely, if you're maybe jaded by community, which makes it easier to retreat and be lonely, if you're new as a part of this church, Or maybe you're not new and you've experienced the ups and downs of community, because it is not easy. This is no magic bullet. This doesn't solve everything. Community is difficult. Interacting with other people is hard, which is why we want to retreat from it. If you're like, hey, I'm just fine, thank you. Here's what I want to encourage you to do. Just show up. Be here for this series over these next 7 weeks to understand, what does God have for you in this idea of welcome. Trust me and us as our staff as we prayed and asked God, and that this was one of the words that he gave us for our community. Trust that even if you're new, you're showing for the first day, maybe this is for me. On February 1st, we're going to be launching our 30 Days of Welcome Challenge. And so we're leading up to that, and that's going to be a challenge that we're going to invite you to embrace to jumpstart some new practices of welcome in your life. And then, of course, as we start here in January, this is when September and January, we invite you to join a home group. Listen to what John Ortberg, an author and pastor, said about this idea of joining groups. One of the marks, he says, of the early church was their commitment to connectedness, because they knew connectedness doesn't just happen. They met together every day. They ate together with glad and sincere hearts. Robert Putnam, political science professor at Harvard and author of that book I mentioned earlier, Bowling Alone, made a staggering comment. Listen, as a rough rule of thumb, if you belong to no groups, but you decide to join one, you cut your risk of dying over the next year in half. If you decide to join a group and you're not, when you cut your risk of dying over the next year in half, it's difficult to imagine anyone not interested in cutting their risk of dying in half. He says, that's why the new motto for small groups at the church where I serve is, join a group or die. His point is kind of funny, but kind of real, of going, this is a necessary practice in our lives when technology is pushing us towards loneliness, isolation, depersonalization, as we are a community that has been marked by and shaped by the good news of God with us, that he is the message, and his presence is what brings healing and saving and renewal in our lives. And the most likely way we're going to experience that work, the presence of Jesus, is in the presence of other human beings. Friends, you were created for this. This is built into your DNA of what it means to be human. And listen, every time you take a step towards community, towards another person, towards a person-to-person communal interaction, though it may not be easy, though there may be disappointment, though there's sometimes hurt, though it's up and down, you are taking a step to become more human, more like yourself, and to have an experience, an encounter of Jesus, the good news, present with you as well.